Hey everyone, so in this section we're talking about what is the best Canadian-based university. Now this is going to be particularly relevant for those of you who are international candidates who have aspirations of studying at a Canadian-based university at some point in the future. This is also going to be relevant for those of you who are based in Canada who are looking for a little bit more context behind the Canadian-based university system. Now, if you've done some preliminary research, you've probably come across a few interesting things. The first is that the Canadian system is regularly compared to the American-based system, and in some cases, they're actually grouped together. And there's actually good reason for this. You're going to experience quite a similar experience in terms of delivery method, structure, and in some cases quality amongst many of the institutions that you could potentially go to in both the United States and in Canada as well. However, there are going to be some key distinctions for you to make note of as well. One of the most fundamental distinctions is the fact that many American-based institutions will look at standardized test scores as being one of the most fundamental components of the application process. And so you've probably heard of things like the SAT score or the ACT score, which is going to be extremely important for students to do well on for them to be granted admission to some of the more prestigious universities within the United States. Whereas the Canadian-based system doesn't necessarily look at standardized test scores in the same way. In fact, they'll typically look at high school transcripts in addition to some other supplemental documents to determine whether or not the candidate is the right fit for that particular program at that particular institution. Another thing that you've probably come across is the fact that the ranking system within the United States typically has a little bit more emphasis than what it does in Canada. And there's a couple different reasons for this. In the United States, there's far more post-secondary institutions, particularly at the university level, in addition, of course, to the community college level as well. And so for this reason, there might be a need for students to have an understanding of where their institution ranks relative to some of the other offerings within the country as well. Whereas in Canada, there's not nearly as many post-secondary opportunities at the university level as there are in the United States. But the other thing for you to also note is the fact that many of the universities based in Canada happen to be public institutions. So in the United States, if you were to look at the rankings, you'll find that the top institutions in the country are typically a mix of mostly private schools, but also some really prestigious public schools as well. Whereas in Canada, many of the institutions that rank internationally are going to be public institutions. In fact, there's far fewer private universities in Canada. In a lot of cases, these happen to be religious-based institutions. And so what people are looking for from a private school in both Canada and the United States are going to be far different in that sense. So one of the other things you might find as a result of that as well is the fact that many employers who are based in Canada might not necessarily look as heavily at the prestige associated to the particular institution where the degree was obtained from, but more so at what the particular major was, how the student did in a lot of cases, and how that can actually benefit their organization. Now, of course, there are going to be some industries who still look heavily at where the student actually graduated from, but this is going to be something that's going to be a case-by-case situation, isn't something that is fair to say across the board. So with that said, many international students, when they're looking at programs that are based in Canada, they'll typically look at what programs actually rank the highest or what universities in particular are the ones that rank the highest. In a lot of cases, they'll gravitate towards schools like the University of Toronto, McGill University, and the University of British Columbia. Now, these three institutions typically rank amongst the top three or amongst the top five in almost all of the rankings charts you can find domestically, but also from international ranking systems as well. If for no other reason, a lot of students will know of or have heard of the particular location that are associated to these particular universities as well. And so for that reason, they might also find these opportunities attractive as well. It's very important for you to consider if you're going back to your native country when you're going to be graduating from these particular programs. And that's going to be a key component as to whether or not you're going to be looking at the ranking of the university or if it's going to be something that isn't as important to you as some other aspects that you might be looking for in an education. And what I mean by this is the fact that if you're going back to your native country and you've worked really hard on a degree in Canada, you want to ensure that the level of prestige that it has domestically is also going to be recognized internationally as well. And so a lot of people like to look at schools like the University of Toronto, not only because it ranks very well in both in Canada, but also in an international context as well. But even people who are not as well in tune with some of the international rankings, they would have heard of Toronto, and they'll associate that university to a city of Toronto, which is of course one of the largest cities in North America. And so they'll kind of assume that there's a certain level of rigor that's tied to the institution as well. Another thing to really consider is whether or not you're going to be staying within Canada. So if the opposite is true and you're staying within Canada as well, then you might look at specific programs that rank very well domestically, but might not necessarily have as much international prestige as you would like also. So this might allow you to look beyond some of the bigger tier schools that a lot of people typically gravitate towards, but maybe some of the smaller programs or even some of the more niche programs within institutions that you might not have heard of as an international candidate, but are going to offer you the specific type of education that you're looking for as well. It's very important for you to also consider the type of industry that you're getting into and also how broad that industry is as well. In a lot of cases, if that industry is well represented in North America as well as in your native country where you want to be returning to after you graduate, there might already be a very strong alumni network from North America in your native country, and so they might be able to vouch for the level of rigor that's going to be tied to your program as well. Now, if you're staying in Canada, particularly if you're going into the public sector within Canada, you might be looking at other components, again, like what flexibility is involved in the program, whether or not there's co-op options or whether or not they have specific partnerships with community colleges for you to actually broaden the applied knowledge that you can get with your degree as well. And so this is going to be something that might be even more important for you to be able to capitalize on as well so that you can take advantage of potential employment opportunities when you graduate as well. So largely, if you're looking at the most prestigious institution that you can attend in Canada, it's typically going to be the University of Toronto, McGill University, and the University of British Columbia. Now, depending on the rankings that you're looking at, these three can be in different orders. In some cases, McGill might rank first, University of Toronto might rank first, some other people might rank University of British Columbia first, although in many cases, it's typically between the University of Toronto and McGill University, which tends to be the ones that many international employers or students who even don't have a very strong understanding of the Canadian landscape will have probably heard of at some point in time as well. Again, there's a lot of things for you to actually consider. It's very important for you to also consider programs, like I had mentioned, that have very strong domestic ties. And I'm going to give you a quick example here just to give you an idea of what it is that we're actually talking about. If you were to look at business schools within Canada, you probably naturally gravitate towards the ones that rank amongst some of the more popular ranking bodies internationally, but you might overlook some of the really strong domestic programs. I'll give you a great example. The Schulich School of Business at York University is one of the stronger programs based in Canada. Now, if you were to judge that program based on how York University ranks internationally, you might completely overlook that program because it might not necessarily rank as well as you would like for it to, given the level of prestige that program is said to have domestically. Another great example of this is if you're interested in medicine and if you're looking at McMaster University, which is regarded as one of the stronger medical schools within Canada as well. If you're looking at international rankings, you might see McMaster University not rank as highly as some of its counterparts domestically or as you would hope for it to, and so you might overlook these really strong opportunities because you're so fixated on the actual ranking of the overall institution and not necessarily looking as closely to how that specific program ranks within the country that you actually are going to be studying for that program for. And that's going to be something for you to really consider, particularly if you plan on staying in Canada when you graduate. So hopefully this provided you with an overview. This is supposed to be a complete introductory type of thing for those of you who have a very, very limited understanding of the Canadian landscape and are essentially looking for a starting point, and you're looking at what things you should actually be considering when you're selecting what programs to consider to potentially apply to in the future. So I'd like to hear your comments, questions, and concerns. Have you attended any of these institutions? Have you thought about it? Do you know anyone else who has? If you have, I'd love to hear your comments, questions, and concerns in the comment section below. As always, thank you so much again for listening. Make sure to subscribe and make sure to like this video. And as always, we'll see you in the next one.